Pack your things and get the hell out of my building, Roger. You are done here. Brandon Vance's voice echoed through the executive suite, his face flushed red as he slammed his fist onto the mahogany table. Standing beside him was his father, Donald Vance, the chief executive officer of Northwest Funding Group, who simply stared at me with cold, indifferent eyes. Behind them, two burly security guards stood by the glass doors, waiting to escort me out like a common criminal. All this because I refused to sign my name on a single sheet of paper. A compliance certification that would greenlight a fraudulent $320 million commercial loan syndication. I looked at Brandon, then at Donald, and felt a strange wave of calm wash over me. I did not raise my voice, I did not plead. I simply reached into my pocket, touched the cold metal of my security token, and whispered a single word, "Understood." But they had no idea that by throwing me out to cover up their financial crimes, they had just pulled the pin on their own corporate hand grenade. To understand how a 52-year-old chief compliance officer ended up being escorted out of the company he spent 15 years building, you have to go back to 2011. That was the year I joined Northwest Funding Group, or NWFG, as a senior compliance analyst. Back then, the company was a mid-sized, respectable commercial real estate finance firm. We acted as the crucial bridge between institutional pension funds and major real estate developers. We did not have the massive capital of Wall Street giants, but we had a stellar reputation for integrity. If NWFG certified a loan, the banks knew the numbers were rock solid. Donald Vance was the founder, and in those early days, he was a pragmatic, detail-oriented leader who respected the rules. He hired me because he knew that in the lending world, one bad regulatory audit could wipe out a decade of profit. For the first 10 years, I built our compliance department from scratch. I established our internal controls, drafted our underwriting guidelines, and registered myself with the Securities and Exchange Commission as the company's designated qualifying individual for compliance. By 2021, I was promoted to Chief Compliance Officer with a salary of $20,000 a month, a contractually guaranteed 12-month severance package, and $450,000 in accrued equity options that were set to fully vest in October 2026. I was proud of what I had built. My life was stable, my career was respected, and I expected to retire from NWFG in another 10 years. But everything changed in late 2021 when Donald's son, Brandon Vance, returned from his Ivy League MBA program. Donald, then 58, was beginning to look toward retirement and wanted to transition the company's leadership to his heir. Brandon was 36 at the time, arrogant, and obsessed with the fast-paced, high-leverage deals he saw on Wall Street. He did not care about slow, steady growth. He wanted to turn NWFG into a shadow banking empire. Donald appointed him as the Executive VP of Corporate Finance, effectively giving him free rein over the underwriting department. Almost immediately, Brandon began clashing with my compliance team. To Brandon, regulations were not safeguards. They were annoying speed bumps. He began pushing through high-risk loan syndications, squeezing our risk models to make questionable projects look viable. In real estate syndication, a firm like ours packages a loan and sells portions of it to a consortium of banks. If the borrower defaults, the banks take the hit, while NWFG pockets massive upfront transaction fees. Brandon realized that if he could just get the loans closed, he could collect his multi-million-dollar bonuses and leave the long-term risk to the lending banks. I warned Donald several times about his son's aggressive tactics. "Donald," I told him during a private lunch in 2024, "Brandon is pushing the debt service coverage ratios to the absolute limit. If interest rates shift or a major tenant pulls out, these syndications will collapse and the lead banks will look at our compliance audits. If they find we ignored our own underwriting guidelines, we will face catastrophic litigation." Donald just waved his hand. "Roger, you're too conservative. The market is booming. Brandon is just bringing some modern financial engineering to the table. Let the boy work." By early 2026, the market was no longer booming. Commercial real estate was facing a severe downturn, and Brandon's aggressive portfolio was beginning to show cracks. Several of his mid-sized syndications were on the verge of technical default. Desperate to cover up the losses and secure his annual $5 million performance bonus, Brandon decided to go for a massive home run: the Aria Financial Center syndication. The Aria project was a proposed luxury mixed-use development in downtown Seattle. The developer needed a $320 million construction loan, and Brandon had spent months assembling a consortium of 6 major banks, led by Federal Union Bank, to fund the project. Under the syndication agreement, NWFG was required to contribute 10% of the capital, while the consortium would fund the remaining 90%. Because of the sheer size of the loan, the syndication agreement contained a mandatory Clause 14.4, known as the Key Compliance Officer Certification. This clause was a non-negotiable requirement insisted upon by Sarah Jenkins, the Chief Risk Officer at Federal Union Bank. Sarah was a seasoned no-nonsense risk manager who knew the industry's pitfalls. Clause 14.4 explicitly stated that before any funds could be drawn from the escrow account, the registered Chief Compliance Officer of NWFG, which was me, had to personally sign a certification confirming that all underlying financial metrics, borrower disclosures, and environmental liability audits had been verified and complied with federal banking regulations. In August 2026, Brandon sent the ARIA file to my office for the final pre-funding compliance sign-off. The closing date was set for September 1st, and the first drawdown of $115 million was scheduled to be released from the escrow account immediately after closing. I sat down at my desk, opened the heavy blue binder containing the ARIA loan files, and began my audit. I did not just look at the summaries Brandon's team provided. I dug into the raw data. I pulled the environmental site assessments, the tenant lease agreements, and the appraisal reports. Within 48 hours, my stomach sank. The entire deal was a house of cards built on deliberate financial fraud. The fraud in the ARIA file was not subtle. It was a blatant, desperate attempt to paint a dying horse gold. The first red flag appeared in the environmental site assessment. The property, located on a prime corner of downtown Seattle, had previously housed a dry cleaning facility for over 30 years. In commercial real estate, dry cleaning sites are notorious for soil contamination due to perchloroethylene, a highly toxic chemical. A legitimate Phase 2 environmental audit had been conducted in January 2026. The actual report, which I found buried deep in the raw appendices, showed massive toxic plumes extending under the surrounding city streets. The estimated remediation cost was a staggering $45 million. That liability alone would have killed the project's viability, making it impossible to secure bank financing. Yet, in the main loan application package Brandon had prepared for Federal Union Bank, the toxic soil report was completely missing. In its place was a clean Phase 1 assessment from a shell auditing firm called Clearwater Environmental Advisors. I had never heard of them. When I checked the business registry, Clearwater was registered to an address that turned out to be a mailbox rental store. In Delaware, Brandon had hired a fake environmental consultant to forge a clean bill of health, concealing a $45 million liability from the lending syndicate. The second red flag was in the financial underwriting. The debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR, is the metric banks use to determine if a property can generate enough rental income to cover its debt payments. Federal Union Bank required a minimum DSCR of 125. Brandon's file proudly claimed a projected DSCR of 145, but when I audited the lease agreements, I noticed that 30% of the office space was leased to 3 shell companies at highly inflated rental rates. I cross-referenced the corporate registration of those tenants. They were all owned by a nominee company controlled by the developer's brother-in-law. The rents were fake, funded by a circular flow of cash from the developer's other accounts. Without those artificial rents, the true DSCR of the ARIA project was a dismal 0.95. The project was underwater before it even broke ground. I spent the weekend documenting every discrepancy. I compiled the real environmental report, the shell company filings, and the actual DSCR calculations into a comprehensive 30-page audit memo. On Monday morning, August 24th, I walked into Brandon's office and placed the folder on his desk. "We have a problem, Brandon," I said, sitting down opposite him. "I've completed the pre-funding audit for the ARIA project. The environmental liabilities in the DSCR numbers are falsified. I cannot sign the Clause 14.4 compliance certification. Brandon did not even blink. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. Roger, you're looking at this the wrong way. The developer has a solid relationship with the local government. The environmental cleanup will be handled quietly. As for the leases, those are standard pre-leasing agreements. It is how business is done in the real world. It is bank fraud, Brandon, I said flatly, and it violates Section 302 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. If I sign this certification, I am certifying under penalty of perjury that these numbers are accurate. I won't do it. We need to halt the syndication, notify Sarah Jenkins at Federal Union Bank, and require the developer to submit a realistic remediation plan. Brandon's smile vanished. He stood up, leaning over his desk, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Listen to me, you fossil. This deal is worth $5 million in origination fees to this company. If we pull out now, our reputation with the bank consortium is dead. Federal Union Bank will blacklist us. We are closing this loan next week. You are going to sign that certification. In fact, if you sign it without any more drama, I'll make sure there is a $250,000 discretionary bonus waiting for you in your Q3 payout. Think of it as a consulting fee. I looked at him, disgusted. I don't take bribes, Brandon, and I don't sign fraudulent filings. I stood up, took my memo, and walked out. I immediately scheduled an emergency meeting with Donald Vance. I assumed that Donald, despite his desire to hand the company to his son, still cared about the enterprise he had built over 25 years. We met in the main boardroom that afternoon. Donald sat at the head of the table looking tired. Brandon stood by the window, his arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. I laid out the evidence, explaining the toxic soil liabilities and the circular leases. Donald, I urged, if the SEC gets wind of this, or if Federal Union Bank runs a routine post-closing audit, the company will face criminal prosecution. You could lose everything you've built. Donald looked at the documents, then at his son, and then back at me. His face was a mask of cold resignation. Roger, the company is facing some cash flow issues. The commercial real estate downturn has hit us hard. We need the ARIA fees to cover our operating overhead. Brandon has assured me that the developer will remediate the soil during construction. I am instructing you to sign the certification. I can't do that, Donald, I said quietly. It is illegal. If I sign, I am personally liable under federal law. Donald sighed, leaning forward. Then you leave us with very few options. Roger. The trap was sprung the following Friday afternoon, August 28th. I was called back to the executive suite. When I walked in, I saw Brandon, Donald, and a human resources representative I had never seen before. Roger, Brandon said, his voice dripping with false concern. During a routine security audit of our network servers this morning, IT discovered that you downloaded 50 gigabytes of proprietary underwriting models and client database files to an external hard drive. Further investigation showed you shared these files with our main competitor, Pacific Ridge Finance. I was stunned. That is a blatant lie. I have never downloaded any client files, let alone shared them with a competitor. We have the IT logs, Roger, Brandon sneered, tossing a printed document across the table. It was a forged server log showing my user credentials downloading files at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, a time I was fast asleep. This is a setup, I said, looking at Donald. Donald, you know this is fake. I've been loyal to this company for 15 years. Donald did not look me in the eye. Because of this gross misconduct and breach of your fiduciary duty, Roger, you are being terminated for cause, effective immediately. Under Section 12 of your employment contract, termination for cause invalidates all severance agreements and forfeits your unvested equity options. You will receive no severance, and your $450,000 in stock options are canceled. Pack your things and get the hell out of my building, Brandon barked, gesturing to the security guards. I looked at the forged IT logs, then at Brandon's smug face, and finally at Donald's cowardly gaze. The anger I expected to feel never came. Instead, I felt a sharp, cold focus. They thought they had won. They thought they had removed the only obstacle to their $320 million payday. They forgot that as Chief Compliance Officer, my duty was not just to Northwest Funding Group. My duty was to the law. Understood, I said calmly. I walked back to my office, packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box under the watchful eye of the security guards, and walked out of the building. I did not drive straight home. Instead, I drove to a quiet coffee shop, opened my personal laptop, and connected to a secure network. Brandon and Donald thought they had cut off my access when they had the security guards confiscate my company-issued laptop and phone. They thought that compliance was just an administrative function, and that a signature was just ink on paper. They did not understand the modern regulatory architecture. During my 15 years at Northwest Funding Group, I had designed our compliance systems to protect the firm from external threats, but I had also designed them to protect the financial system from internal corruption. As the designated qualifying individual registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, my compliance authority was not granted by the company. It was granted by the regulators. My digital signature for filing SEC and FINRA reports was cryptographically tied to a physical hardware security token, a YubiKey, that sat on my personal keychain. More importantly, Brandon and Donald had completely overlooked the fine print in the $320 million syndication agreement they were rushing to close. 3 years ago, when we brought Federal Union Bank in as the lead lender for our syndications, their chief risk officer, Sarah Jenkins, insisted on strict oversight. I was the one who negotiated the final draft of Clause 14.4. I had insisted on adding a specific subclause, Clause 14.4.2. Clause 14.4.82 was designed as a safeguard against management interference. It stated, in the event that the designated qualifying chief compliance officer is terminated, resigns, or is otherwise replaced, the lender must be notified within 24 hours. Any replacement of said officer without a board-approved 30-day transition period and a comprehensive compliance audit of all active files shall constitute an immediate event of default, resulting in the suspension of all drawing rights on the escrow account. Brandon and Donald, in their arrogance, assumed they could just fire me, appoint a junior analyst as the acting compliance officer, and have them sign the ARIA project certification on Monday morning. They had no idea that the moment they terminated me without a 30-day transition, they had technically triggered an event of default for the entire syndication. Sitting in that coffee shop, I inserted my YubiKey into my laptop. I logged into the SEC's electronic data gathering, analysis, and retrieval system, known as EDGAR, using my personal administrative credentials. I went to the Compliance Officer Registry for Northwest Funding Group. I changed my status from active to terminated disputed. In the explanation field, I uploaded a brief notice stating that my termination was a retaliatory action resulting from my refusal to certify a fraudulent commercial real estate transaction. Next, I opened a pre-prepared email draft addressed to Sarah Jenkins at Federal Union Bank. I had known Sarah for 10 years. We had served on regional compliance panels together, and she knew my reputation for absolute precision. Dear Sarah, I wrote, please find attached a comprehensive audit memorandum regarding the ARIA Financial Center syndication loan. As the Chief Compliance Officer of NWFG, I have uncovered material financial and environmental fraud in the loan application files. Specifically, a Phase 2 environmental report showing $45 million in soil contamination liabilities has been concealed, and the debt service coverage ratio has been artificially inflated from 0.95 to 1.45 using circular lease agreements with shell companies. I have refused to sign the Clause 14.4 compliance certification. Consequently, I was terminated for cause on August 28th under forged allegations of data theft. As of today, NWFG is in violation of Clause 14.4.2 of the syndication agreement. Attached to the email were the real Phase 2 environmental report, the corporate filings of the developer's shell companies, the true DSCR calculations, and the copy of the forged IT server logs Brandon had given me, alongside my personal home internet logs proving I was offline during the alleged data theft. I also uploaded the entire package to the SEC Whistleblower Office portal, submitting a Form TCR, tip, complaint, or referral under Section 922 of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. This law was designed specifically to protect and reward whistleblowers who expose corporate securities fraud. It guarantees confidentiality and provides a financial bounty of 10 to 30% of any monetary sanctions recovered by the government if the recovery exceeds $1 million. I hit send. The digital packets dispersed into the cloud, carrying the truth to the regulators and the lenders. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for Monday morning. Over the weekend, I relaxed. For the first time in 15 years, I did not check my work email. I did not worry about underwriting deadlines or interest rate hikes. I spent Saturday morning working in my garden and Sunday afternoon reading a book. My wife noticed the change. "You look lighter, Roger," she said. "I feel lighter," I replied. I knew the storm was coming, but I also knew I had built a very strong shelter. On Monday morning, August 31st, the ARIA loan was scheduled to close. The lawyers were lined up. The developers were waiting, and NWFG was preparing to receive the first drawdown of $115 million to pay off their pressing short-term debts. At 8:30 a.m., my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed the main number for Northwest Funding Group. I let it go to voicemail. At 8:45 a.m., it rang again. This time it was Donald Vance's direct line. I let it ring. At 9 a.m., the phone began to ring continuously. Messages started flooding my inbox. Brandon, Donald, and even the HR representative were calling. They were not screaming anymore. Their messages were filled with a growing, desperate panic. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and finally answered a call from Donald. "Roger, thank God you answered," Donald gasped, his voice shaking. "We have a massive misunderstanding here. We need you to come to the office immediately. The bank is refusing to release the ARIA funds. They're saying your digital compliance token is inactive, and Sarah Jenkins is refusing to speak to anyone but you. Roger, we need you to sign the certification. We can sort out the severance issues, I promise." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Donald. I am no longer the Chief Compliance Officer of Northwest Funding Group. You fired me for cause, remember? I am escorted out of the building. My compliance credentials have been deactivated, and my status has been registered as disputed with the SEC. Even if I wanted to, I cannot sign that document. You'll have to find another qualifying individual." "Roger, listen to me," Donald pleaded, his voice cracking. "Brandon made a mistake. We can fix this. We will pay you the full severance. We will vest your equity options today. Just come in and help us clear this up with Federal Union Bank." "The time for negotiations was last Friday, Donald," I said quietly. "Now, the banks have the audit memo. Good luck." I hung up the phone. By Monday afternoon, the executive suites of Northwest Funding Group had descended into absolute chaos. The $320 million syndication was completely frozen. Federal Union Bank, acting as the lead agent for the lending consortium, officially suspended all fund transfers. The developer of the ARIA Financial Center, Craig Henderson, was a notoriously aggressive billionaire. He had a hard deadline of September 1st to close on the downtown Seattle land acquisition. Under his contract with the landowners, if the $40 million land payment was not wired into escrow by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the purchase agreement would automatically terminate. Not only would Craig lose the land, but he would also forfeit his $10 million non-refundable deposit. Craig was furious. He spent Monday morning screaming at Donald Vance over the phone, threatening to file a $50 million lawsuit against NWFG for breach of contract and failure to deliver the committed syndication funds. But the nightmare was only beginning for Donald and Brandon. Sarah Jenkins, the chief risk officer at Federal Union Bank, did not just halt the ARIA loan. She acted with the swift, cold efficiency of a federal prosecutor. Recognizing that NWFG had fired their chief compliance officer under highly suspicious circumstances and had attempted to hide a $45 million toxic waste liability, Sarah initiated a default audit under NWFG's main $80 million operational credit facility. This credit line was the lifeblood of NWFG. It was the cash reserve we used to fund daily operations, pay employee salaries, and temporarily warehouse smaller commercial loans before selling them to investors. Under the credit facility agreement, any material misrepresentation of financial condition or the sudden termination of the registered qualifying compliance officer without a pre-approved successor constituted an immediate event of default. By Monday at 2 p.m., Federal Union Bank officially froze NWFG's $80 million credit line. The company's bank accounts were locked. Checks written to vendors began to bounce. The firm was suddenly facing a complete liquidity lockout. Without access to their credit line, NWFG would be unable to meet its own payroll obligations by the end of the week. At 3:15 p.m., Brandon Vance called my personal cell phone. The panic in his voice had mutated into blind, furious rage. "You miserable, backstabbing coward!" Brandon screamed into the phone. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed this company. We are going to sue you for corporate sabotage, breach of confidentiality, and theft of proprietary data. Our lawyers are drafting the complaint right now. We will ruin you, Roger. You'll never work in this industry again." I listened to his breathing on the other end of the line. I did not get angry. I did not get defensive. I kept my voice calm and professional. "Branson," I said, "I suggest you take a deep breath and think very carefully about your next steps. The proprietary data you claim I stole consists entirely of compliance records and audits that I am legally required to maintain under the SEC rules. Under the Sarbanes-Oxley whistleblower provisions, any retaliation against an employee for reporting financial fraud, including filing false corporate lawsuits, is a federal crime. If your lawyers file a complaint containing forged IT logs, they will be committing fraud on the court, and they will face disbarment." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have already submitted a Form TCR to the SEC whistleblower office. The SEC has opened a formal investigation. If you attempt to file a lawsuit against me, it will be viewed as active whistleblower retaliation, which carries severe civil and criminal penalties. I would advise you to speak with a criminal defense attorney, Brandon, not the company's corporate lawyers, your own personal lawyer." There was a long silence on the line, followed by the sound of Brandon hanging up. An hour later, Donald Vance called me. His tone was entirely different. The arrogant, untouchable CEO was gone. He sounded like a broken, desperate man. "Roger, please," Donald begged. His voice cracked with exhaustion. "Let's talk like reasonable men. We've known each other for 15 years. I know Brandon went too far. He's young, he was under intense pressure, and he made some very bad decisions. But we can fix this. I am prepared to offer you a confidential settlement. $1 million cash paid out as a consulting agreement. We will also vest all of your $450,000 in equity options immediately. You can walk away with nearly $1.5 million. "And what do you want in exchange, Donald?" I asked. "Just a simple statement of clarification," Donald said quickly. "A signed letter to Federal Union Bank and the SEC stating that your audit memo was based on preliminary, unverified draft figures, and that after reviewing the final documents, you are satisfied that the ARIA project complies with all regulations. We will reinstate you as CCO for 1 week. You sign the Clause 14.4 certification, and then you can retire with your money. No one has to know, Roger. The company survives and you get a comfortable retirement." I felt a pang of sadness for Donald. He was willing to commit active bank fraud and obstruct an SEC investigation just to save his son from his own arrogance. "Donald," I said softly, "that would be perjury and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. I spent 15 years building a clean reputation. I am not going to federal prison to cover up Brandon's crimes. My attorney, Sarah Jenkins, and the SEC investigators already have the original documents. There is nothing to clarify." "Please, Roger," Donald whispered. "It will destroy my family. You destroyed it yourself when you let Brandon run this firm into the ground," I said, and ended the call. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah Jenkins from Federal Union Bank. "Roger, Sarah," said her voice crisp and professional. "I've reviewed the audit memo and the attachments you sent. Our independent environmental engineers have confirmed the Seattle soil contamination reports. It's a disaster. If we had funded that loan, we would have been liable for $45 million in cleanup costs. I want to thank you. Your integrity saved our consortium from a massive write-down." "Thank you, Sarah," I said. "I just did my job. Our legal department is officially terminating the ARIA syndication agreement for fraud," Sarah said. "We are also demanding immediate repayment of the outstanding balance on NWFG's credit line. We are cutting them off, Roger, and I will personally ensure that the SEC receives our full cooperation. The collapse of Northwest Funding Group was swift, public, and absolute. The closure of the ARIA syndication deal left a massive hole in the developer's plans, and Craig Henderson wasted no time. True to his word, he filed a lawsuit against NWFG for breach of contract. By mid-September, the courts had frozen what little capital NWFG had left in their operational accounts. Without their $80 million credit line from Federal Union Bank, the company could not meet its basic financial obligations. The payroll for the 70 employees at our headquarters could not be funded. By late September 2026, Northwest Funding Group officially shut its doors and filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidation of all assets. Donald Vance's 25 years of corporate building evaporated in less than a month. The company he had created to be his family legacy was dismantled by bankruptcy trustees to pay off a long line of angry creditors, but the civil fallout was nothing compared to the criminal prosecution that followed. The SEC, armed with my compliance audit memo and the documents provided by Federal Union Bank, fast-tracked their investigation. They referred the case to the Department of Justice. In November 2026, Brandon Vance and Donald Vance were indicted on federal charges of bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Brandon's forged environmental assessment and the shell leases were clear proof of criminal intent. The forged IT server logs they had created to frame me only added obstruction of justice to the list of charges. Brandon Vance, the Ivy League MBA who believed he was too smart for compliance rules, faced the full weight of the federal sentencing guidelines. In March 2027, he was sentenced to 5 years in a federal correctional facility in Sheridan, Oregon, with no possibility of parole. He was also ordered to pay $2.5 million in personal restitution. Donald Vance, due to his age and his cooperation with the prosecutors during the bankruptcy proceedings, avoided prison time. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, ordered to pay a $5 million civil penalty, and was permanently banned by the SEC from ever serving as an officer or director of a publicly traded or regulated financial company. His reputation was ruined and his retirement assets were decimated to pay the fines. Meanwhile, I had my own legal battles to fight. I hired a veteran employment attorney, Alan Foster, to represent me in a wrongful termination and whistleblower retaliation lawsuit under Section 806 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Because the bankruptcy trustee was trying to wind down the estate and avoid costly litigation, and because the evidence of retaliation was undeniable, especially after my forensic IT expert proved that the server logs had been manipulated by Brandon's personal login credentials. We reached a quick settlement. My claims were classified as administrative expenses of the bankruptcy estate, which meant they were paid out before the general unsecured creditors. I received my full 12-month severance package of $240,000, the cash value of my $450,000 in equity options, and $80,000 to cover Alan Foster's legal fees. It was the exact financial compensation I was contractually owed, paid in full. But the true financial resolution came from the SEC Whistleblower Office. Under the Dodd-Frank Act, the whistleblower program is designed to reward those who take the risk of exposing corporate fraud. The SEC's enforcement action against the ARIA project developers and the NWFG estate resulted in a total recovery of $45 million in penalties and disgorged profits. In October 2027, I received an official notice from the SEC. I was awarded 20% of the collected sanctions as a whistleblower bounty. The payout was a staggering $9 million, tax-free. When the wire transfer cleared into my account, I sat at my kitchen table with my wife, looking at the screen. For 15 years, I had worked 45 hours a week, auditing spreadsheets, arguing over contract clauses, and ensuring that other people played by the rules. I had earned a good salary, but I had never imagined seeing that kind of wealth. I did not go out and buy a luxury sports car or a mansion. Instead, we quietly sold our home in Seattle and bought a beautiful, modest house on the coast of Oregon, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Today, at 53, I am retired. I spend my mornings walking on the beach with my dog and my afternoons reading or working in my woodshop. Occasionally, I do some pro bono consulting work for a nonprofit that helps clean up industrial contamination sites, and once a year, I guest lecture at a local university's business school on the importance of corporate ethics and internal controls. Sometimes I think back to that Friday afternoon in Brandon's office. I remember the flush of anger in his face, the arrogance in his voice, and the way he sneered as he told me I was fired. He thought he was the smartest man in the room because he had a prestigious degree and a title. He thought he could use his power to bend the rules and crush anyone who stood in his way. But he did not understand that the system is built on rules for a reason. Compliance is not just a department or a checklist. It is the framework that keeps the entire structure from collapsing. When you ignore the rules, when you think you are above them, you don't just break the system, you ensure your own destruction. All I had to do was stand my ground, refuse to sign, and let the system do its work.